If you've ever played any of the previous games from developer Daniel Mullins Games, like Pony Island or The Hex, then you probably know they make totally standard games which have found an audience based on their perfectly fine gameplay alone. So with that in mind, you can imagine when I saw their new deck building roguelike Inscryption was out, I really didn't have any strong feelings and only bought it as fast as Steam would take my money, just as a little goof.
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
So does Inscryption bring any game-changing ideas to the deck building genre, or would it be better off getting the ET treatment ending up buried in a forest? Well, grab your pliers, pull up a chair, and let's find out. Inscryption started its life in late 2018 when Daniel Mullins put out his Ludum Dare 43 entry, Sacrifices Must Be Made. The unique concept here is that cards have a blood cost and can only be played if you sacrifice that number of cards currently active on your field. Other than that, it plays like a normal TCG. Cards have an attack power and health, and there's a few rare cards with special modifiers like the cat, which can be sacrificed without being destroyed, or the raven, which attacks the player directly even if they're blocking cards on the field. Overall, for a 48-hour game jam game, it's super polished, and when looking at how much of the base game loop was brought over into Inscryption, it's honestly just impressive. Keeping with the setting, Inscryption takes place in a mysterious cabin where you attempt to beat a procedurally generated campaign run by a pair of eyeballs who acts as a dungeon master. And he's actually pretty great. He's like a Daniel Day-Lewis character actor kind of dude that gives detailed descriptions of what's happening in the game, and sometimes sticks on a mask, becoming a completely different character while the board and surrounding area transforms to fit. The game already has this really creepy tone supported with a kind of dark retro yet weirdly high-res art direction, and I thought all these different elements come together to make something that feels really special and unique. So moving on to the gameplay, when the player starts a run, they're given a deck with 4 random unit cards from your growing collection, and a stack of squirrel cards which can be played with no cost and then sacrificed. The round is then played until either player has done 5 more damage than the other. This is shown by a scale on the table which has little golden teeth added to it for every point of damage. I think it's also a really interesting idea not having a standard health pool and allowing for huge 10-point comebacks from the brink of a big fat loss. Although usually what it means is that if you get a bad hand, you end up losing before you have any kind of chance. At the start of each turn, you have the choice of drawing from a unit pile or the squirrel pile, and that means card economy and getting broken cards through RNG is really important if you want to go far, because you can lose almost every battle just making a single wrong move or having a bad initial draw. Since your summoning power is reliant on the number of units you have out, you can easily end up in a situation where all of a sudden you can't play any cards in your hand, and you just have to keep drawing squirrels stalling out the inevitable spanking, or try to top deck a bone card and eat the damage. These bone cost cards are unlocked after getting a bit further into the campaign, and these work hand in hand with a sacrifice mechanic where every unit that dies gives you a bone token, and instead of requiring a sacrifice, you trade the tokens to summon units. There are also other hidden unlocks scattered around the cabin which you can try and find by getting it from the table anytime you are in an active battle. It's another nice layer because most unlocks will require you to complete puzzles that you won't be able to complete without getting further in the campaign, and then they can alter the way you play. And when I say these are hidden, I really mean hidden. Some requiring experimentation and a bit of luck on your part, but it's a fun little distraction from the main card-based gameplay. Overall, Inscryption runs on a pretty well thought out system, but don't go in expecting a card game with infinite deck building depth and perfect balancing because that isn't what this game is, and a lot of that was traded to give the player options that can create completely broken cards and combos fairly dynamically. Over the course of a campaign, you move on a map much like Slay the Spires, where you can select different pathways which have random encounters and events on them. Some will improve a card's power or health, while others might give you single-use items to aid you in battle like a squirrel in a bottle or a knife to help tip the scales in your favor. But the good stuff is when you get a chance to infuse cards with runes which add special abilities to the card, and the devs really went wild with these things. There's a book which details all the possible runes, and when I first opened it, I was completely overwhelmed with all the possibilities. Even more so since I'm a known 2 brain seller when it comes to deck building, and something was telling me Hearthstone Top Deck wasn't going to be able to help me on this journey. Now some runes are better than others, but things start to get really wacky when you start stacking runes on cards, which I believe can hold up to 4 runes on a single card. As an example, let's take a look at what is without a doubt the best card I ran into, and one that helped me blow through all 3 campaign maps along with their bosses, and then taking what can only be described as a massive dookie on the final boss.
God damn!
So when you fail your run, you're allowed to create a new card by combining the cost, the power and health, and the runes from 3 different random cards. In this case, I created this god card using a 0 cost, a 1/2 card, and a card which returns to hand on death, making it perfect for free sacrifices, defending, or even killing low health enemies if needed. Somehow I also managed to get an extra rune which gives 4 bone tokens when it dies, which is like every 2 seconds. It's the kind of card you might find tucked under my mattress for lonely nights. It's my beautiful undying freebie, pure Inscryption perfection. But that really is the thing. If you're someone who likes Slay the Spire or Monster Train and other roguelike deck builders with tons of replayability and are looking to get this game to fit into that category, it might not end up scratching the itch you were hoping. This isn't the kind of game you can spend hundreds or maybe even like 20 hours playing. I finished my first campaign playthrough at about 2.5 hours and ended up happily putting the game down to write this after around 8 hours, still with plenty of secrets left to discover.
Let me in! Let me in!
But my excitement to do more runs just kinda wasn't there. To be clear though, even though this won't be a forever game in my rotation, the Inscryption experience is one that is well worth going through on your own. And unfortunately I can't say much more without getting into spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, hop to the timestamp on the screen. Alright, that was your warning, now let's get into it. You really can't imagine how hard it is to write about games like Inscryption while being spoiler free, because all the marketing material and Steam store page only show content from the first of 3 parts of the game. Even more shocking is that once you head into the second part, which moves away from the 3D roguelike campaign and takes place in the 2D side-scrolling version of Inscryption, you find out you've been playing exclusively with mechanics and cards from only one of 4 different deck types. It's an absolutely mind-blowing revelation because I could have happily just kept playing with that single type in the cabin for hours. That's how fun the gameplay of Inscryption is. The only downside here is that before you have a chance to test out the different decks, you're forced to pick a single style which you're then locked into for the rest of the section. I chose Technology, which works like a standard Hearthstone deck with the player getting energy at the start of their turn which can be spent to play cards. And there's still some really great ideas here, but I kind of think this section ended up falling a little flat, which is really unfortunate since this is the area where you have the most freedom to build whatever deck you want with cards from any of the 4 types. But since you're only taught how to use the deck you choose, I kind of had no idea what any of the gem cards did from the mage deck and straight up didn't use them. Also, since each deck type has a specific way to play cards like energy or gems or squirrels, mixing and matching just didn't really feel like a viable option. And even if you do feel like experimenting, there's only like a total of 16 encounters in the entire area, 4 in each of the zones which includes a boss, so you don't even have much time to mess around because once you have enough cards to build an actual well thought out deck, you're probably getting ready to move on to the next part and again leave behind everything. And that really is the largest problem in Inscryption because it's really awesome having a sweet 4th wall breaking kind of game, but when it comes at the cost of losing all progress I've spent hours getting, it doesn't feel as great. After finishing the game, you do have the option to replay any section, but it will always reset your progress to what you would have had when starting it. So it makes it really hard to want to go back and find all the stuff you might have missed when you have to retrace most of your original steps just to get a nice deck going. Once you finish up the second part of the game, you're put back into another new 3D setting playing with an updated version of the technology deck, an extra lane, and a revamped item system. And despite the aforementioned shortcoming of being a genre-bending deck building game, it really is a feat how unique the gameplay feels in every part despite being based around a lot of the same cards, runes, and mechanics. I feel like it even deserves more praise than that because just making a card game that functions and is fun is pretty cool, and then somehow to be able to constantly pull out new mechanics that completely changes the way you look at and play throughout the entire 8 hours is something really special, especially when you look at how polished the whole thing is as well. How varied the art direction is across every section, yet still feels like it could belong in the same world. All the great story moments and set pieces. Like without spoiling the big ones, one of my favorites was Taylor making a card for another player and then sending it to them over the web. And you can really go for it here, whether that means creating a 5-cost 0/1 no ability card just to troll some unlucky bunghole, or spending the extra time to make a really OP card for him. After a lot of soul searching, I ended up making Mr. Help You, a 5-cost 1/1 card which returns to hand on death, will attack left and right diagonal spaces, and kill any enemies it hits no matter their current health. And unfortunately, it really is a case that if you love something, you've got to set it free. So knowing I'd done my good deed for the day, I sent it off into the web and waited, and then kept waiting. And eventually was informed that there were no available players on the entire web. So my dirty little Mr. Help You came crawling right back on his hands and knees, taking his rightful place next to Undying Freebie in my ever-growing collection of straight-up naughty cards. And aside from those moments, there are all these wacky meta elements they added along with the sheer number of secrets littered throughout the game that an entire Discord group is working on deciphering.
What the fuck is this?
And even with all that going on, I didn't encounter a single bug throughout. Well, at least one's not put there by the devs. But it's the reason myself and many others are so excited whenever Daniel Mullins Games has a new release. Inscryption is so much more than just another deck builder to add to the pile, and if you go into it not expecting a never-ending amount of gameplay, then there's so much to love and discover here. If you're a fan of similar games, then you won't regret giving Inscryption a try, and if you aren't a big fan, this one might surprise you if you give it a shot. Without a doubt, this one gets a big recommendation, and honestly, do yourself a favor and go check out The Hex and Pony Island while you're at it. Not only are they all great games, but they deliver great experiences. These devs definitely deserve all the success coming their way, and we all deserve games of this quality that are willing to push their genres to the absolute extreme.